largely the last 2.6 and 7 were omitted because of lack of time. Let's remember that I close at the point where Gandhiji withdrew the non-cooperation movement because of the violence at Chauri Chaura in the then Gorakhpur district, where the local peasants were attacked by police and then in reprisal they killed a number of people. There are many debates, many arguments about it. Was it only because of the violence? After all, he had not withdrawn the civil disobedience when there was much greater violence in Kerala under the Mafia rebellion. Or was it because he was afraid that if the movement continued, then it would throw the zamindars on the side of the British government? Because although there were no peasant organizations was the name at that time, nevertheless, Chauri Chaura indicated, as Mafla rebellion had indicated earlier, that there was a large amount of peasant distress. And in such a situation, it could be expected that the government measures would be much harsher than before. One must remember that the government measures against the non-cooperators were compared to the later civil disobedience movement much less harsh. There were no large-scale arrests of non-cooperators. Those who left, for instance, the MAO college, which was soon to become the Aligarh Muslim University, were not arrested. They were allowed to establish their own national Muslim University or Jamia Millia Islamia, first at Aligarh and then at Delhi. What they were after were leaders, not followers. You see, one has a formula for this repression. One could say that in the non-cooperation movement, they went after leaders, arresting them, putting them on trial and so on, whereas the ordinary followers, they left largely alone. Whereas in the civil disobedience movement, they went after both leaders and followers. So it was a possibility that the British government might then really turn very severe. And now that they were on the point of making an agreement with Turkey, which was all clear by this time, then it was possible that the religious fervor within the non-cooperation movement from the other part of Muslims might also subside. So these considerations might have been there. But whatever the reasons, the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement created great demoralization. And as I said yesterday, there was an immediate division between those followers of Mahatma Gandhi who were close to him, like Patel, Rajagopalachari, Rajendra Prasad and others. They continued to support him, perhaps in spite of inner reservations, but they continued to support him and continued to carry on what was known as individual non-cooperation. They would not join government service or continue their practice or go to an educational government financed educational institution. But the others who have had their independent following, particularly C.R. Das and Motilal Nehru and M.A. Ansari, Dr. Ansari, they decided to change policy, and they formed the Khilafat Swaraj Party, later on called the Swaraj Party, within the Congress in order to pursue a political program. That program was to use all electoral forums like the Legislative Council, the Central Assembly, to raise their demands and issues and to present people's grievances there. This was called non-cooperation from within. Now, government sensing this division, British government, made one of its various blunders by arresting Gandhiji and prosecuting him for sedition, for encouraging rebellion against His Majesty King George V. It might be said objectively that that was, while from the government it was considered a blow to Gandhiji, it was actually a great aid to him, because obviously this arrest after the withdrawal of the non-cooperation movement was extremely unpopular even among those who were not supporters of Gandhiji. They said, now that the non-cooperation movement has been withdrawn, why are you prosecuting him? And this even affected the English judge. When Gandhiji was led into his court, he stood up, and so even the prosecutor had to stand up. And he made it clear that if Gandhiji said that not guilty, he would hold him not guilty. He practically made by his language clear. But Gandhiji said, I am guilty. I am indeed rebelling against King George V. And now I want to set out the reasons why I am rebelling. And then he set out Punjab wrongs, oppression of the Indian people, tribute, whatever have you, bringing out people's demands, and said that it is for these purposes that I am opposing King, and I am certainly guilty of sedition against His Majesty. And the judge then said that, I am now bound because Mr. Gandhi has declared himself guilty, so I must award the minimum punishment, that is 6 years in prison. But I hope that the government would release him. Gandhiji then thanked the judge for giving him the same sentence as Gangadhar Tilak had received. He said, you have honored me by placing me by the side of Parliament. So this was a personal success for Gandhiji. This particular trial was long remembered in the national movement, and it encouraged others to stand up and say that yes, we are committing sedition against His Majesty. Not to be not guilty, but to stand up and say we are guilty. Now, the British government looked for some reason to release him. They knew that he would never ask for it. So when for the first time he fell ill after 2 years, they immediately released him on ground of illness in 1930. Now, although Gandhi's grasp over the Congress remained at the Gaya Congress later in 1922, his followers were in majority, but characteristically he advised his followers to let the Swarajists lead the Congress. The Swaraj Party remained important in 1920s. Although C.R. Das himself died in 1955, he had particularly been bringing the issues of the poor. In a famous speech he had said that what we are fighting for is the interest of the 98%, not the 2% in the top, not the big men, the property men, the landowners, but the peasants and the workers. So C.R. Das was of that type, But unfortunately, he died in 1925, and then the Swaraj Party began to weaken and began to be divided between the Swarajists and the responsivists. Responsivists were those congressmen, Munji and others, who were also communal, who said that if the government gives us some concessions, we will cooperate with the government. But they were generally rejected by the electorate, some of them became ministers under the hierarchy, but they certainly weakened the Swaraj Party. Although in elections it remained the largest party, generally getting 1/3 of the seats in the Central Legislative Assembly during the elections of 1920. But generally speaking, there was a decline in Congressism. There is no doubt about it. And there were therefore new tendencies, new approaches to the struggle for freedom, different from what Gandhiji had laid out as yet. Up till now, what his approach, which was that of gradual constitutional change, but service of the people directly, his constructive program in which he sent his volunteers and himself went to the villages, teaching untouchability, girls' education, and spinning and encouragement of spinning and weaving, and calling upon landlords to reduce rents, and so forth. He believed in the constructive program and in non-violence. But these were very long-term effects. And although, as we shall see, or as I can say now, this was one of the reasons why the Congress had roots in the villages. This was its constructive program because thousands of volunteers were involved and they reached a large number of villages. And many people through this khadi board, spinning and weaving, widows, old widows, women who had no other support, and also weavers, particularly weavers, were found employment or at least supplementary income from the activities of his country. But still, this had limited effect, and therefore two trends developed, which we might now examine. The first trend was a revival of the armed revolutionary activities, which we had seen, the last of which had taken place under the banner of the other movement, which we discussed yesterday. This revival, as one would expect from the other movement, took place not only in Bengal, where it was natural, but also in Punjab. So it had a broader area simultaneously than previously. The first inkling of this to the English came in what came to be known as the Kakori Dacoity case. The train was established, was stopped at Kakori, and was looted, some policemen and guards. The group that organized it was led by Ram Prasad Bismil and Ashfaqullah Khan and others. Bismil is known for his poetry also. Ashfaqullah was also a poet. He had his Takhallus as Hasrat, and Ram Prasad had his Takhallus as Bismil. That Bismil's verse particularly, सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे सर में है, देखना है तो कितना और I think this became very popular in the complex. It was recited at meetings and the ghazal was sung. There are various versions of the ghazal, but because as it spread, but this verse, the first verse is called. They were captured and tried and hanged. Others, many received life sentences. One of their colleagues, Chandrasekhar Azad, was not caught. And Chandrasekhar Azad became to adopt increasingly a leftist ideology. First of all, he with the Punjab revolutionaries formed the Indian Republican Army, Hindustan Republican Association. They formed it in 1924 before Kakori. And then now with Bhagat Singh, they formed a left-oriented revolutionary group called Indian Hindustan Socialist Republican Army, HSRA. In the synopsis it's wrong, not revolutionary but republican. Hindustan Socialist Republican Army, HSRA. While in Bengal, Surya Sen organized another group which was called the Indian Republican Army, IRA. Bhagat Singh and others engaged in individual incidents like throwing a bomb in the assembly against the labor legislation then pending there and against the Security Act against communists. They had earlier, in revenge for the attack, physical attack by the police on Lala Lajpat Rai, owing to which he died in 1929, they killed Sanders, a British official, a police officer, and for that ultimately they were bodily executed. But the importance of Bhagat Singh is not only that he resorted to terror, but because of his socialist and indeed communist idea. He had educated himself, but had a wide reading. He believed in socialism. He rejected Gandhiji's path of non-violence, but he continued to insist that despite his differences, he had the greatest respect for Gandhiji. He did not contest his honesty. Even when Gandhiji denounced him in an article in Indian. He was, although he is now often regarded as a hero by the RSS, he was totally hostile to communalism. He said that if any leader in the Congress I favor, this is Jawaharlal Nehru because he is socialist, he doesn't believe in religion, he has a particular program for the which is close to the socialist program. And his last piece was, before his death, why I am an atheist. He said, there is no afterlife, but whatever I have, whatever desires I have, are for me. Now the second development of this movement was the development of socialist and communist ideologies outside the terror groups. Um, much of this came from the October Soviet Revolution of 1917. Uh, Already in 1921, a communist party was formed of fugitives from India, Muslim fugitives from India, who were called Muhajirin. Remember why they were mostly Muslims. And they then returned to India in order to organize a communist party here, Akbar Khan and others. They were, however, caught, and over 2 years there were trials at Peshawar, known as the Peshawar conspiracy cases, in which Akbar Khan and others received harsh prison sentences, 6 years rigorous imprisonment. But in 1924, within India, the Communist Party was formed at Kanpur. Despite the fact that the same year earlier, in the Kanpur conspiracy case, Muzaffar Ahmad and others had been sentenced to prison. The Kanpur conference resulted in an organization of the communists all over the country, and in 1926, finding that the word communist attracted police and other to disfavor, they formed a party called the Workers and Peasants Party of Bengal. In which Muzaffar Ahmad was again the leading figure, but other figures in the party included S.A. Dange, Shaukat Usmani, and others. In 1928 at Meerut, this party became All India Workers and Peasants Party, and it wanted to operate alone as well as in the Congress. The British government, seeing that the communist influence in the labor circuit was becoming dangerous, and they feared also an alliance between communists and Jawaharlal Nehru. They said this plainly because Jawaharlal Nehru had returned in 1927 from Soviet Russia. He had visited briefly Soviet Russia, but more important than that, he was vice president of the Colonial People's Organization, the imperialism formed at Belgium, in Brussels, Brussels, Belgium. I will come to Nehru presently. Now, therefore, in 1929, the government struck. It arrested 31 communist leaders all over the country, treating the Meerut conference as the major function of sedition, a meeting leading to sedition, and tried them for sedition. They were all sentenced on very flimsy evidence, because it could not be shown that they had collected arms or that they were rebelling against the government. So on very flimsy evidence, mostly based on Comintern resolutions passed in Moscow and their newspaper articles opposing the British government. These were sentenced to long imprisonment. Muzaffar Ahmad, the leading communist figure at that time, to life imprisonment, rigorous life imprisonment. These 31 included 3 Englishmen, and Bradley. They were communists who had come from England. Aligarh is also connected with this, because when they appealed against the judgment, The High Court judge sitting on them was Sir Shah Sulaiman. That was that time justice. And as I said, since the individual evidence was very poor against them, perhaps had there been an English High Court judge, they would have been acquitted. But Sir Shah Sulaiman simply modified their sentencing. And he was then rewarded with knighthood. And when the federal court was established, he was put in the federal court. And the final gift was vice chancellorship of a university. So he was heavily rewarded for the don't think that judiciary is uninfluenced, was uninfluenced in British times. Promotions came swiftly if we gave the right. In any case, this practically destroyed the Communist Party and much of the socialist organizations for some years to come on to revive in the 1950s. This being the position, the British government, from its CID and other intelligence agencies, seemed satisfied that the Congress, very much like Curzon in 1994, was satisfied that the Congress was on the way out. They made several statements like that the Congress was demoralized, divided. There are these terror groups which need to be suppressed, communists which need to be suppressed. And so now is the time to win over all the dissidents, all the demoralized elements in the Congress and bring them over to the side of the British government. So how to do it? To appoint a constitutional commission, Simon Commission, under the provision of the Government of India Act of 1919. The commission was to be appointed after 10 years, but they appointed it in 1927. And in 1927, this commission of 7 members consisted all of white people, on the ground that you had to be a member of the British Parliament. Of course, this was precious because the Royal Commissions were not found to consist of members of Parliament, British Parliament. You see, Agricultural Commission was selected either of Hindus or Tamil, among others, 2 or 3 Indian members. So it was not necessary at all for the Royal Commission to consist only of whites. And so the first, and this Simon Commission was to come to India, take evidence, and all Indian leaders were encouraged to go to it. Muslims to ask for more Muslim seats, and to Mahasabha to ask for some concessions, Hindus, and so on and so forth. Ambedkar to plead for the Dalits, for depressed classes. He was leading a depressed class federation. So the thought was that this would divide Indians. But you know, the best plans that are laid out fail sometimes. And really quite unexpectedly, despite the fact that communal rioting had begun in 1925, most Muslim leaders had been now denouncing, even sometime Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali denouncing Gandhiji for deceiving Muslims and so forth in the Khilafat movement. Although their real bitterness was against Mustafa Kamal for reasons that we discussed yesterday, abolition of Khilafat of Mustafa Kamal. But their irritation fell on Gandhi. Despite all this, suddenly there was a surprising unity among all the Indian leaders including even liberals like Sir Tej Bahadur Kapoor, that there was some humiliation in going before an all-white commission to plead your case. And therefore accept Ambedkar and a breakaway Muslim League, Punjab. All organizations, Muslim League, Hindu Mahasabha, Congress of course, and others, refused to go before Simon Commission. And when Simon Commission came to India in 1928, they decided to hold demonstrations throughout the country. Here. And these demonstrations were immensely successful. All kinds of measures were used. You see, there was that tragedy of Lala Lajpat Rai. He was attacked in such a demonstration in Kailash, India. But other ways were found. At Lucknow, and this is what my family tradition is, and I find it confirmed by Nehru's autobiography. It was decided by the British government that very great security measures would be taken. No ordinary Indian would be allowed within some area in which the reception to Simon Commission was to take place. All the great Talukdars, Hindu and Muslim, were invited. The governor was there and so on. And now they thought, how would any demonstration occur? But they forgot the fact that Lucknow people are expert kite flyers. So my uncle Khaliful Zama, who actually initiated all his nationalist past by joining the Muslim League later, he organized the kites, and a large number of kites fell upon the governor and Simon Commission and the guests with the words, Simon, go back, little. So as I say, ingenuity beats many security measures, and the protests against Simon Commission were surprisingly general and effective. Very few witnesses appeared before the Simon Commission. And actually, ultimately, although the Simon Commission report was voluminous and said that India was not a nation and so forth, but it took time, and actually it was disregarded in practice because the British government realized that no Indians would like to bear the name of Simon. However, the opposition to Simon Commission showed that despite these differences, there was an upwelling indignation and opposition to the British rule in India. And briefly, the reasons were that the causes of Indian grievances had not disappeared. You see, you can demoralize the Congress for some time, but unless the causes of grievance disappear, people will remain aggrieved. They may be disappointed, but if they have no other way of relief, they will come back to the old leadership. First of all, in India, the literacy rate in 1931 was only 9%. The average age was 25 years, which had remained constant since 1881, ever since the average age was counted from the census, 25 years. An average Indian was expected to die at the age of 25. The economic decay was shown by the fact that the urban population of India by the 1931 census was only 11%. have been falling in the 19th century and were not risen on the 30 years of the 20th century at March. A depression had begun, falling prices from 1928, developing in 1929, which actually made the payment of money rent very difficult for the peasants. And evictions began, peasant evictions in landlord areas, and they also began in the Rayapari areas where the peasant could not pay the revenue, or he could not repay the debt to the money lender. There began an period of unemployment, lower wages, as mill owners reduced wages because the prices were falling. And so strikes. 38 million labor days were lost with a small industrial sector. You can imagine what it means in the year 1920. And therefore, all these were indicators that the Indian people grievances remained, and they wanted someone to voice to those grievances. Now it's here that the intervention of Subhas Bose, but particularly Jawaharlal Nehru, became very important. Jawaharlal Nehru was the son of Motilal Nehru, but there was much affection, but little political agreement apart from opposition to British rule between father and son. He had not joined the Swaraj Party, which was led by his father. He had gone to England, Europe in 26-27, which is visit to Washington. And it was here that he began to frame his own ideas, very greatly influenced, as he said, by Marxism and the Soviet Revolution. He regarded, for instance, the two greatest men of his time, Lenin and Gandhi. So he had great respect for Gandhiji, but no agreement with his picture of village India or an India in which the state was simply maintain law and order and other things were left to the individuals and to individual effort, constructive effort. He wanted that people who now join the national movement should be offered something more tangible in economic benefits. Very quickly, in his view, this was rent reduction for the peasants, ultimately abolition of the middle. He was to say in 1930 that he saw no particular reason for the existence of zamindars, why they should be there, and control over mill owners, capitalists, and ultimately an industrialized India built through the public sector, through state effort, with social welfare, gender equality, and full democracy. On all those points on which Gandhi was always ready to compromise up till then. But on these points, Nehru was not willing to compromise. And therefore, he particularly appealed to youth and suddenly rose in popularity within the country. In 1927, at the Madras Congress, where the moderate Dr. Ansari presided, he and Subhas Bose got passed a resolution against Gandhiji's opposition. Total independence for India. So India should be totally independent. And so that it can offer all those things which Nehru wanted the national movement to promise to the people. Subhas Bose was as radical as Nehru so far as the demand for independence was concerned. But as the insightful Bhagat Singh noticed, he was not as forthright on the issues on which Jawaharlal Nehru was so strong. Abolition of Zamindari, control of the capitalist sector, socialist India and so on. Yes, he supported broadly socialism, but without those positive aspects in which Jawaharlal Nehru expounded. Not actual support for peasants in their actions against the landlords. But he was very popular among the youth for his radical denunciations and the fact that he had spent, whereas Nehru had spent only 1.5 years in prison, he had spent 5 years of imprisonment where he had been from Burma. So that was also was a hero. And they both combined in the Madras session, and for considerable time, they acted in unison on the issue. It was in Bengal because of the death of C.R. Das. There was a power vacuum. That power vacuum, Subhas Bose almost averted his death. But he didn't have that large support that C.R. Das had in all communities. For instance, C.R. Das had said that he would again, any time, give majority of seats to Muslims in Bengal, who were there in majority. Or sometimes he spoke of parity, 50-50. So, but on these points, Subhas Bose was not such. However, this combination, and particularly Jawaharlal Nehru's socialist program, increasingly fortified the peasants and workers and youth confidence in the Congress. Now, as against this, Gandhiji and the older leadership wanted to stick to Swaraj, home rule, would accept dominion status, and even further entitlements to the British. For instance, Motilal Nehru report, all parties report, which was submitted to all political parties in 1928, Congress, Muslim League, Hindu Mahasabha, all were there. In this report, nothing more was asked than dominion status, and defense and foreign affairs were allowed to be under British control, including the appointment of the Governor General. And they gave joint electorates with reservations for the Muslims. But the Muslim League, like the Sikhs, asked for a larger number of seats than justified by the population. They were around 27% of the population, they asked for 33% seats. And had they asked it earlier, I think it would have been given. But Jinnah's demands came at the very last moment. And then the Hindu Mahasabha obstructed it. They said their signatures are there on that report. And ultimately, the Muslim League therefore drew away from the Motilal report, but not on the question of dominion status, only on the question of Muslim electoral representation. And it is actually an amusing thing that all through Muslim League talked about their representation and not about what they would be represented in. Whether that Indian Parliament would be sovereign or not, that didn't concern them. It was this percentage, 33%, and the majority of seats for separate electorate in Bengal and Punjab that they were mainly interested in. That was also true of Hindu Mahasabha. So, one must remember that their rejection of Modilal report was on this minor point, it was not on the point of dominion status. It was very difficult for the Congress to get it through in the Calcutta session. And Gandhiji had to make the concession that if the British government did not accept Motilal Nehru for 1 year, then a program of civil disobedience would be. I am now in the midst of the third lecture. I will not go into details, minor details, the negotiations right through 1929 before the Lahore session of the Indian National Congress. But let us ultimately, despite a statement in which Lord Irwin's promise that he could consider grant of dominion status, very vague promise. A statement was then issued by all leaders, including Jawaharlal Nehru. He said against it better take it. But Subhas Bose, to his honor, did not sign it and protested against it. They said that they are willing to negotiate with the British government. But ultimately, that fell through because in Parliament the British government said that Irwin's offer contains nothing that was already contained in the old legislation, and therefore the Congress said that no promise has been made, and then the Lahore session was held when the task was now clear that the offer made at the Calcutta Congress to British government had lapsed, and now was the point to start civil disobedience. Now let us at that time look at the strength of the Congress. It is clear that Gandhi's constructive program gave it very immense organization. It was present in a large number of units, very large number of units. In villages and districts. Then there were regional organizations. And one of the most outstanding was the Khudai Khidmatgar organization in Kanpur. Some of Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's life and achievements sound very much like Gandhiji's. He was first drawn to the Khilafat movement very seriously. He was one of the Muhajirs who went to Afghanistan. And there he realized that Muslims would be the worst rulers. And therefore came back to India, not as a loyalist of the British, but with the feeling that Muslims need to be rejuvenated here, and not necessarily in Sharia, although he was a devout Muslim himself, but in humanity. And so he named his group Khudai Khidmatgar. Khudai means world, God's creation. It includes everything. And when riots broke out in Bannu, where Hindus were attacked by Pathans, People were surprised to learn in India that one Pathan had appeared here to defend the Hindus by through his volunteers, and that Pathan was Khan Abdul Ghaffar. So by that action, he suddenly became an all India figure. His men wore red shirts because that was not easily soiled. It had no communist documents. There was no communism. Now he attended the Calcutta Congress and was greatly impressed by the way in which serious discussions took place. And with all his followers, he joined the Congress, which up till then had been a Hindu organization, basically. Yeah. But he amalgamated them. And he was thus supported very strongly by Jawaharlal Nehru. Gandhiji knew little about him, and there were complaints against his men that they picket wine shops with Gandhi's men were also doing in villages. But it happened that wine shops in Peshawar were owned by Hindus who were supporters of the Congress. So this was a matter which greatly worried Congress leaders. But ultimately both Nehru and Gandhi supported Khan Abdul Ghaffar and compelled the Hindu leaders to accept his leadership and the Congress in North Frontier, West Frontier province was actually the Khudai Khidmat Award. They merged. So it had strong strength there. It had strong strength among peasants, particularly as what Nehru was saying, what Shahjahan was saying in Bihar, and other leaders, what Ranga was saying in Andhra. All these things went across to reach the peasant. But essentially, the strength lay in the middle class. To begin with. And it was therefore when it was decided to launch civil disobedience at Lahore, it was also noticed that there was little support among minorities. As I said, both Muslims and Sikhs were demanding impossible number of seats. Sikhs who were 13% of the population in Punjab wanted 30% of the seats. Muslims who were about 27% in India now wanted 40%, 33% in their view was a compromise. So these kinds of demands were impossible. Even if Congress had wanted to concede them, they couldn't. And therefore, Lahore session said that Congress is open to negotiations for any privileges that minorities might seek. But instead of that, the minority representatives, Muslim League and others, went to the first roundtable conference in Britain. All parties except Congress and of course the illegal Workers and Peasants Party of Communists and Socialists were represented in the roundtable conference where of course they could not agree. Hindu Mahasabha could not agree with the Muslim League and the Akazis could not agree with the others. Even on representation, let alone the problem of independence and dominion status never arose in the first roundtable conference. Here, the civil disobedience started. I will quickly go through it, except marking something. Here, Gandhi was left to dictate how this should be ordered. It was not left by the Lahore Congress, not in the hands of its president, Jawaharlal Nehru, but who had come out with a speech address claiming socialism, but in the hands of Gandhi. On January 26th, the flag was taken and the tricolor In the beginning it was as Mrs. Kama, Madame Kama had displayed it red, white and green, but later on it became saffron white. This was flown to replace the Union Jack, and this became, until 1947, this was celebrated as the Independence Day by the nationalists, because on this we both make India free was given. Gandhiji then, instead of demanding immediate independence, that was called Purn Swaraj or Full Mukhtari, demanded concessions on 11 points. And it is arguable whether this was the right approach or not, but probably this was the correct approach, because you were identifying grievances, precise grievances with which people could associate. And out of these 11 grievances, 11 points, which included protection or reduction of revenue and so on, Gandhi chose abolition of salt duty, which affected the poor first, not for the rich people it did matter. That salt duty should be abolished, and for that the Satyagraha, salt Satyagraha, began in March and April. This time, it was not the policy, the government's policy was not that of non-cooperation. It was, as I said, arrest everyone. And therefore, things that had not occurred in the non-cooperation now occurred. Lathi charges, arrest everybody. At the Dandi March, it was Dandi March from Ahmedabad to the way of Cambay, where fault fans, when that began, everyone was arrested. Other congressmen were arrested. Sarojini Naidu and others for lathi charge. Many Congress people were very bravely interned and then arrested and taken to prison. This took place all over India. Almost every leadership was arrested. Then, in April, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, after preparation, decided to open non-cooperation with Peshawar, and before he could begin, he was arrested. His arrest led to demonstrations. Those demonstrations, a large number, were so large that almost the entire city passed into the control of the non-cooperators. You who dislike Vande Mataram, I don't know why. The slogan in Peshawar was Allahu Akbar Vande Mataram. That was what the Pathan shouted. The British first brought in British troops. They couldn't control the crowd despite firing, so they brought in Garhwalis. There was a Garhwal regiment and there was a Sikh regiment. Despite the fact that the Garhwalis were continuously hit by stones from the crowd, they refused to fire. This is a very major incident in India. The first time any section of police or army disobeyed their British officers after perhaps 1850, except for the Singapore duty. This was the first time. And when the Sikh regiment was asked to come in, they refused, and the British did not want to test them because they didn't at the same time want to take an issue of it. So the Garhwalis were disarmed, they were court-martialed, many of them sentenced to life imprisonment. In very harsh court martials. Their release was one of the major issues in 1937 when the Congress Ministry took office. The Congress Ministry then made it an issue whether Karwalis would be released or not. If they were not released, they would resign. And then the British government had to surrender. But they were, as I say, the Karwalis would know that Congress Ministry would come. Apart from the incident of the Garhwali, the pure slaughter, sheer slaughter in Peshawar, something like 250 killed, was after the Jallianwala Bagh, first such incident. Then there was the almost thereafter when Gandhi was arrested early in May. Then there was the Sholapur uprising. For about a week, Sholapur was in the hands of non-cooperators. Violence took place there. Police was disarmed. It was placed under martial law. And only then the Sholapur was overall. These were two major incidents within the non-cooperation, which meant that now even the army, Indian troops were being affected by the civil war. In Bengal, there was the Chittagong Barbary case, where Surya Sen, a large number of comrades, raided Chittagong, took possession of the armory, and then fought a running battle with the police and the army. Ultimately, he died a martyr in 1944. His supporters were either killed or executed or sentenced to long. So this was one of the revolutionary actions, but one which has again a particular place, owing to scale, a particular place in India. As time passed, Muslims began also to join in. Muslim leaders like Ansari and others had held aloof. They had said that until Muslims also in large numbers would join non-cooperation, they would not join. And that they first founded a nationalist Muslim party. Abul Kalam Azad also joined, also he was with three will non-cooperate, Dr. Ansari and Khaliful Zaman. And then they joined non-cooperation and went to jail. Nevertheless, Muslim participation in the non-cooperation is said to be about 3% among those who were sent to prisons. Out of 1 lakh, there were about 3,000 Muslims. So compared to their population, and these were basically mainly from the northwest Frontier province, some in Punjab, from Haryana, and there were a few of them. But essentially, Muslim participation is low. Middle class participation also began to be exhausted. There were so many hartals, so many young people in prison, that there was a beginning of demoralization, or the beginning of exhaustion. Now, there were two paths open at that time. One was to bring in the peasant although peasant demands were not very prominent in the 11 points, and revenue reduction had not been the one on which the Satyagraha had started, it was abolition of salt duty. Nevertheless, in Gujarat and in UP, peasants had come in considerable numbers, much more than in non-population. And now Jawaharlal Nehru and others thought, Jawaharlal Nehru had completed his 6-month term and had been released. He thought that large numbers of peasants were coming if the Congress promised debt reduction and abolition of the Nidari. And therefore he started this campaign. This campaign meant first that he was immediately kept in prison again. But apart from that, the campaign spread and the British government became very nervous. On the other hand, for Gandhi and the right wing, this was not a very welcome option. They still felt that in parts like Bengal and Bihar, Zamindar support was important. Or they felt that peasant movement cannot be kept non-violent. Whatever be their motives, they were not very happy with the involvement of peasants. Although to his honor, Gandhiji defended this in his negotiations. Well, ultimately the Gandhi agreement took place on 5th of March 1930. This agreement had two aspects. One was the negative. Congress did not even gain the abolition of the salt duty on which they had done the same. They gained the release of only such congressmen as had been arrested but not put on trial. They gained practically no return of property confiscated. You see, people say once that, on some agitation, more than 1 lakh of people went to prison in free India. And some journalists knew that civil disobedience was outdone in such a. The journalists forgot that an arrest under British government meant loss of property, dismissal, no employment ever again, and almost the life of a ghost if you had no other source of life. In India, after independence, 15 days imprisonment honor, you could say, this Satyagraha, I went to prison in 15 days. When you were a middle class person, you would get good food from your home, which you wouldn't get when you were in prison and putting hard labor. Hazrat Mohani, I don't know if you read it. There was this verse. है मश्क सुफन जारी चक्की की मशक्कत भी तरफा तमाशा है हसरत की तबीयत तो चक्की चलाना पड़ती थी. This was not just an ordinary. So these people were subjected to that. They had lost their property, and if they were put on trial, if they were charged with some criminal offence, execution of Bhagat Singh, Sukhdev and Rajguru was not even put off, let alone getting them in. Meerut conspiracy case detainees were not even discussed in the event Gandhi was. So, when according to this agreement, Gandhi discontinued the civil disobedience. In substantive matters, little was gained. Congress was invited to the second round table conference, but that was given the experience of the first roundtable conference, something which Congress should never have accepted. In any case, on the other hand, this was a great climb down for the British government to negotiate with an Indian subject as an equal, to bring that agreement in the Gazette Extraordinary as if it was a treaty with an equal power. As Churchill put it in Parliament a week later, British Parliament, that it had seemed as if we have signed an armistice in which Mr. Gandhi is the victim. Congress people were immediately released. Most of them had no charges against. And they were then received by cheering crowds at the gates of prison, taken triumphantly to their houses. There were victory celebrations as if Congress had won a great victory. So it was a huge morale booster, unlike the withdrawal of the non-cooperation, it was a huge morale booster for the Congress. I shall try to hurry up now. But unfortunately, the second roundtable conference proved a disaster. All the divisions within India came out there. Gandhiji got involved in small disputes, petty disputes between Hindus and Muslims, for which he is criticized rightly by the official history of the freedom movement, edited by Dr. Taraji. And there was little talk on Indian independence. So Gandhi left second roundtable conference, came back, and there was now some talk of starting the civil disobedience. But before the civil disobedience could be really started, Gandhi and other Congress leaders were put in prison. Laws previously enforced, draconian laws, were revived. Large number of Congress workers were rounded up, and actually the second civil disobedience could not get off the ground because almost everyone was listening. So there was in fact, there was no second civil disobedience because, as I say, it did not get off the ground at all. But two things had happened in the meantime, which we need to consider. One was the passage of the Fundamental Rights Resolution at the Karachi session of the Congress in 1951, in which a large number of rights were promised to Indians if and when India becomes free. Mass suffrage, adult suffrage, both men and women, gender equality, neutrality towards religions, no particular religion to affect the state. The word secular was not used. The word was neutrality in relation to religions. Control of basic industries. Workers and women's protective conditions for women and workers. Land to the tiller so far as possible, otherwise rent reduction. Scaling down of indebtedness. All these were in compulsory education, primary education. All these were promised to India. The resolution was drafted by Nehru and presented. This became now the program of the Congress. Even the right could not now disown it. They might disown it in practice but not in words. And in 1930, 7 elections and 46 elections, this was the major, this was the document on which the Congress manifesto was produced. So this was an important gain. Obviously, women had taken part in the civil disobedience movement. They could not now be left out. More women had gone to prison than Muslims, unfortunately. And peasants, of course, had to have their voices. Peasants of Gujarat, in particular, had lost their lands by joining the civil disobedience, and many of them had lost whatever property. So, everyone, all these classes had to be satisfied. The second thing which was very disturbing was one which would now drag India into crisis after crisis, the communal and caste issues. The third roundtable conference in 1933 gave the communal award. MacDonald gave the communal award. In this communal award, separate electorates were formed for scheduled castes in addition to those for Muslims. Thus, it seemed as if scheduled castes would be encouraged to have their own parties as against the Congress. Nationalist Muslims were used to saying that if there were no communal electorates, there would not have been any communal problem, because then candidates would have had to appeal to both communities wherever they were. Whereas separate meant that even in general constituencies, the general tendency would be to appeal to Hindus, and in Muslim and Sikh constituencies, to appeal to Muslims. Now this was extended to scheduled castes to break the strength of the Congress. This was quite clear that this was an extension of the process of division. It must be remembered that Ambedkar had not taken part in civil disobedience, he had not taken part in any operation against the government, although the British government had continued to enforce all anti-civil practices. You see, until independence, I'll give you one instance. At the railway station, no Dalit could even drink water. A Muslim could go to a Muslim Paniwala, and a Hindu would go to a caste Hindu Paniwala, an obvious punishment. And a scheduled caste person was expected to go to the steam engine, and when the water was coming into the locomotive, it was what he wanted to do. So this was the provision under the division. There was no reservation for scheduled. And therefore, this reservation in the castes was particularly motivated. And Gandhi thereupon went on a fast, and ultimately there was a Pune Accord, by which it was agreed that there would be joint electorates, but these would be reserved for scheduled castes as the case today. What was being proposed for Muslim reservation was now extended to scheduled castes. That is joint electorate, but only scheduled castes can be. Gandhi now very seriously took up the opposition to untouchability, recognizing this factor, but it is fair to say that he had rejected untouchability in South Africa, used to clean his toilets and others' toilets himself there. He had always Dalits in his ashram. But now this he became very particular about it, called them Harijan and God's children, and he would now only eat cooked, the food cooked by the sweeper, not all Harijans, but particularly the, which is now called in Mahadalit, Bihar Mahadalit, the sweepers, the Valmiki's. And he went on a fast against untouchability in 1933, and until many Hindu leaders gave him their undertaking that they would not support untouchability, untouchables would be eligible to enter all temples and so on. They would have well water and access to everything. Until then he could not abandon. So this became a major effort not only in Gandhi's organization but also in the Congress. Dalit effort or Harijan effort in the Congress should not be underestimated. It was one of the major mass contact movements in the national. I will give you one instance and then perhaps that will show you what it was like. In the Communist Party, I asked the district secretary of that time, Munshi Gadagar Singh, how it was that you being a communist were allowed to be secretary of the district committee and a member of the ICC. You voted for Subhas Bose and not for Sitaramaya Gandhiji's candidate. And why Harpal Singh was made a member of the ICC by Gandhiji, but he knew that you were both communists, atheists, and so on. Thinking of it, he said that he had no alternative. So I said, why? He said he had no alternative because Harpal Singh and I had gone to Harijan villages. We had no money. I had no money. I went to a Bandi village, that was what they were called. And I was teaching them Urdu so that they could become attendants at the kachari, if they could read Urdu. And instead of that, they gave me food. So I spent 3 years there preaching the Congress ideology. Among them, I was disowned by my Thakurs. I couldn't enter my family because I had my caste had gone. And this was also the case with Harpal Singh, but many some 2 or 3 other groups. Now it is this kind of experience which makes a real movement. And what is astonishing was the matter of fact way in which they were saying it. Not vainglory, he never used to mention it. When I pressed him why Gandhiji should choose you and Harpal Singh of all the galaxy of Congress leaders in Aligarh district, this was the reply. So it was this kind of mass work that was the basis of the Congress success. You see, in the 1937 elections and moreover in the 1946, the Dalits voted entirely for the Congress. In 1937, Ambedkar got some votes in Maharashtra, but in 1946, very few. So this kind of thing should be remembered. It was not just propaganda, not going on the mic as I am doing now, but basic works, almost risking your life, risking your comfort, having no comfort at all in any sense. And so although Pandit Nehru was not in favor of this kind of Harijan mass contact, Gandhi thought nevertheless it was one explanation for the Congress success. The other thing was the coming up, it was not to the liking of the right wing, but was important for the coming up of mass organizations, Kisan Sabhas and trade unions, which had their political implications also. They were all, if they were not affiliated to the Congress, it was because Congress did not affiliate them, but they were totally supportive of Congress, opposition, British rule, and the Kisan Sabhas certainly supported were a movement against the. By 1939, the Kisan Sabha membership surpassed 1 million, and that was a huge figure for those times. Now the last, the last point I will have to leave the fourth one tomorrow, and I will quickly go over the last point. On the basis of British commitments to the Third Roundtable Conference, the only thing that the Act of 1935 gave was a kind of provincial autonomy. It enlarged the electorate. It was still, the British government still felt that the Congress represents a microscopic minority. As Churchill said in Parliament, the ordinary Indian considers the British government is my bar. And therefore the expectation was that if you enlarge the electorate, if you make it from 10% to say 25%, lowering the qualifications, and women were now voters not because of any decision by the British government but by the judgment of the Madras High Court in 1920s, which the British government was advised by its lawyers not to contest the harassment fault. Instead of saying candidates belonging to the male sex, the rules just said candidates. But the result was therefore that women being persons were naturally also entitled to and stand as candidates. So that was not the issue, but the voters' numbers were enlarged in that way. When the 1937 elections took place, and by this time the communists also had changed their policies, and they were now trying to form a united front with the Congress. They had entered the Congress through the Congress Socialist Party, which had been formed in 1934. And now therefore, in the Muslim League also there was some understanding with the Muslim League, although Muslim League fared very badly in the 37 elections. And the Congress unfortunately relied on independent candidates rather than setting its own candidates in the constituencies. Nevertheless, the Congress won unexpected success. Our dear Chancellor Nawab Chatari's UP Agriculturist Party was soundly defeated. He was defeated in his own constituency. They were a loyalist party. So the landlord parties were thoroughly defeated. And the Congress obtained majority or near majority, enabling it to form governments in UP, Bihar, Odisha, central provinces, and Bombay, Madras. And it was able to form governments by just support of independence, but very firm support of independence. In the northwest frontier, Azad became the premier, and in Assam, in addition to these provinces, and the coalition government in Sindh. Only in Punjab and Bengal it lacked majority. In Bengal, the Unionists gained with majority. They were a loyalist party, but with much support among Muslims, Sikhs, and Hindu peasants, Hindu landlords and peasants. These ministries worked till 1939, and the report card was mixed. In some provinces like UP, their performance was excellent. For instance, they insisted on the release of Karwali prisoners and other political prisoners, and the British government had to surrender. They stopped the imprisonment of communists in most provinces. From 1934 to be communist was illegal and leading to imprisonment, but the Congress ministries did not enforce it. Their attitude towards trade unions was also largely sympathetic. Their rent reduction, or what was called tenancy legislation of 1939, was very radical. In fact, after 1939 tenancy legislation, rent reduction actually took place because during the war, prices rose, inflation rose, but the rent could not increase. So for all these reasons, and then they changed the syllabi of the schools. This was a very important step that they took. They said that all government-funded schools, including Minto Circle, which was funded by UP government, should either go on to Hindi or Urdu. So Minto Circle went on to Urdu. And for this reason, my high school education, up to high school education, I could only write in Urdu. My English was awful. It's still awful, but at that time awfuler. However, the syllabus was wonderful. And this was the case in many states. The Muslim League criticism in the Peakwood report that Muslims were being persecuted was totally incorrect. There were certain religious overtones in some of the ministries, not in UP, but in central provinces, and there was some support, some anti-labor legislation, especially in Bombay, that was passed, and Madras ministry under C. Raja Gopalachari was very conservative. So there were these differences, but by and large, Congress ministries were well. Ministers had their salaries limited to 500. That is to say, a leader in the Aligarh Muslim University got more than a minister of UP government. And they gave, by and large, a very good example of simple life and popular approach, mixing with people. The negative side was that many of them just did not do anything. They did not pass any rent legislation, any tenancy legislation, for instance in Bihar, where Sajanand resigned from the Congress because the ministry couldn't do anything to alleviate the conditions of the peasants. So I said this was a mixed card, but by and large, this was a satisfactory performance. But in 1939, all the Congress ministries resigned because of the coming of the war, in which India got involved, and they said that we have not been consulted. Now this was a technical point, but one must remember that behind this decision was a rift in the Congress. It was making it impossible for the ministries to function, and the rift came like this, and this is the point. And Nehru had been the president, but through a dictate of Gandhi, all power had been vested in Sardar Patel, Abul Kalam Azad, and the third member whose name I have forgotten, parliamentary board, who nominated the members, candidates. And they nominated only right-wing candidates. Anyone who supported the left or the Kisan Sabha or the trade unions was left out. In provinces other than UP, supporters of Jawaharlal Nehru were left out. In outside Bengal, supporters of Subhas Bose were left out. So it was, this led to a drift in the Congress. A large number of Congress people thought that the ministries were manned by people who were not interested in people's welfare. And first Subhas Bose was elected president, and then when his term ended in 1939, for the Tripuri Congress, the ICC elected Subhas Bose again against Gandhiji's own candidate, Dr. V. Sitaramaiah, Gandhiji's and Patel's candidate. And this was a great personal blow to Gandhiji. And therefore, he and his associates non-cooperated with Subhas Bose. This is to join his working committee. So ultimately he resigned. And then there was an attempt to drive his supporters out of the Congress. So ultimately he himself resigned from the Congress and form the forward bloc. So one was this difficulty that the Congress ministries were running into opposition within Congress ranks. In a sense, voting for Subhas Bose in 1939 was a vote of no confidence in the Congress provincial ministries. And therefore, I think the Congress leadership was seeking some reason for resigning. Otherwise, they could have continued with some caveats. But they resigned on the ground that India had been forced to enter the war against Germany without consultation with the Indian people or Indian people. And on that ground, in 1939, well, as I say, I've already overstepped that time limit, so I should take up the last part, number 4, period of the Second War, partition and independence, and then go over immediately to the historiography of India. Thank you. Any questions?
I am taking my question is related to Gandhi.
Yes, louder please.
My question is relating to Gandhi. I am confusing sometimes to understand Gandhi, particularly the inner Gandhi and outer Gandhi. Himself, he addressed like a Sanatan Hindu sometimes, and outer he say a unique India. So I am confusing, sir, relating to.
Yes, it's true that Gandhiji said that I am a Sanatani Hindu, and yet he never worshipped images or went to a temple. And he heavily criticized Arya Samaj, of course, but not on the issue of image worship, as the other Orthodox Hindus were criticizing him, but for his attack on Islam. He said he is qualified to speak on Hinduism, I am not disputing it, but how does he become qualified to speak on Islam? So, Gandhi, first of all, we must understand that Gandhi gave meanings to particular words which were his own. His Sanatani Hindu meant a person who would be goody-goody to everyone, to image worshipper as well as to monotheists, unlike Arya Samajis. His own position on religion was stated later on, and that was that all religions have some truth in them, all religions have some error in them, including my own, he said. And third point, and therefore we should tolerate all religions. This was his position. He changed his positions quite boldly sometimes. For instance, on women in Swaraj, he says that women should stay at home.
Sir, Ambedkar also say he's a defender of Gandhiji also defined the caste. Ambedkar.
Well, actually Ambedkar is both right and wrong. You see, the first thing is, if you are in Gujarat in 1916, 17, and trying to rouse people against British rule, then what do? You attack caste? You don't. You say British are interfering with our customs. In his Hind Swaraj, he doesn't attack the caste system. But then he realized clearly in 1920s, in Gujarat, this constructive program for Ambedkar was adopted. And even earlier, that if you want to include untouchables, you have to attack caste. So again, he said that, I am not promoting intercaste marriages. What I am saying is that intercaste dining is there, it should be followed, untouchability should be abolished, and they should enter temples. Although he did not enter temples, he said untouchables should enter temples. And then ultimately he came to total rejection of caste. So you have to take Gandhi in stages, just as you have to take India in stages. You can't start by, even if today you go and there is a Jat village, you won't run down Jats for what Jats did in Muzaffarnagar, isn't it? You would be very tactful about it. If you want to organize them as peasants, so today also in peasant organizations, workers organizations, you only take a particular issue. You come to different issues as they arise. So in the case of Gandhi, you see this particular development, mental development, very clearly. Because whenever he spoke, uh, as one would say, quite sincerely what he stood for.
Sir, so what is your opinion regarding the Congress ministers of 1957? Because many authors had argued, sir, that it was the 1957 election which gave the momentum to the two-nation theory. That
Well, as I just said, this was overdone. Some people called schools mandirs in MP, but nobody called schools mandirs in UP. So to say that Congress was calling schools mandirs, as in People report, is totally false. So the People report is totally old, and actually this was in response to a Congress movement called the Muslim Mass Contact Movement. And they thought that Muslim League had got very few votes. They were relying on independence, and so they wanted that Congress should develop among Muslims. So they started this K.M. Ashraf, Dr. Z. Ahmad, and others were mainly involved in it, not so much Abul Kalam Azad. And this was quite successful in UP. But then it aroused Muslim League ire and they brought out People report. So Gandhiji advised that the Muslim Mass Contact movement might be wound up in the expectation that this would lead to a compromise with the Muslims. But I'll come to Lahore resolution tomorrow.
One of the biggest turning point of the Indian history, the Congress was to make a coalition government with the League United. Kindly throw some light.
So actually, Abul Kalam Azad says that, but papers show that Abul Kalam Azad himself was most hostile to the coalition. I don't know how he wrote totally different story, if it is his own. There were 2 points of difference. One was that the Congress offered one ministry according to the number of Muslim League members, and the Muslim League wanted 2. Nawab Ismail Khan from West UP and Tariqul Zama from the second point, the first point was not so important, but the second point was that League had said in his manifesto that nothing against Zamindars would be allowed. And the Congress wanted either the Muslim League to change its manifesto and say that they would not defend the Zamindars and rent and tenancy legislation would take place, or they should merge in the Congress. Now the second demand was very difficult for any Muslim leader to do, that is, they should merge with the Congress, then they would get 2 ministries. Or they would say that they would support tenancy legislation, which was also very difficult for them because in their elections they were mostly Zamindars, as in fact Khalifur Zama himself said they were either Zamindars or retired civil servants. So there are these 2 different stories from Khalifur Zama and Abul Kalam Azad, and then there are the reports, papers. But certainly both sides overplayed their cards. But Congress gained most by the tenancy legislation. If they had not got through tenancy legislation, then their support in UP would have fallen.
Sir, as you have mentioned, there is no doubt that socialist leaders like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose played an important role in imparting a multi-class character to Indian national movement and radicalizing and democratizing the agenda of Indian national movement. But when we compare the success of communist political parties in independent India with other political parties, why they have not succeeded much at political front. I am asking this question to you. Basically, so my intention is that I have a kind of hope from communist political parties, and I see a kind of potentiality in them that they have a capability to define the agenda of politics in India because of their scientific basis. For your take. Shall I ask a second question, sir?
So first, ask the second question tomorrow. You see, a skeptic may say that whatever Karachi resolution promised was fulfilled. Hindu code bill meant that over 80% women would in law get equality, monogamy, full right to inheritance, and so on. So that was the social part of it, gender equality. They would say that for such a big country to hold the 1952 election again fulfilled one right, adult franchise. They would say that control of major industries was brought about by Jawaharlal Nehru through building public sector industries. That was fulfilled. They would say help to the untouchables and weaker sections, reservation for the scheduled castes, and other devices of social welfare. So, and then of course land reform, the land agrarian part of the Karachi Resolution. So if you come to it, a case could be made, which Congress never made, that we have fulfilled the pledges of the Karachi Resolution. But what now? You see, the question is what afterwards? And it is there that I think, once you have fulfilled those pledges as we are all now used to elections in which everyone votes. But no one was familiar with this situation. No one could imagine this situation before 1947. Even in 1952, this looked so novel. As every Tom, Dick and Harry went and voted. It is now in the second stage that you are difficulties. What next? And then, of course, new crises which were not there. But if you look at economic development, Subramanian figures show that per capita national income, per capita income fell under the last 40 years of British. And earlier that are not so certain. And they fell in the first 10 years of independence. They rose. Per capita income rose in spite of increase of population. What is called the Hindu rate of growth was actually much more substantive than the present because it was in the industrial sector, 6% per year in Nehru's time. So now the question is to what next? Is socialism the next stage or Washington consensus? Well, I think, in many countries, and now it's in India, when corporate sector gains so much, the electoral exercise is vitiated by financing. And that you are seeing in India. You can see in America that when polls are held, 80% of people say one thing, but 80% of their representatives say the very opposite, say on the issue of Israel. Israel's position is rejected in all polls by vast majority of the American population. But if you go to these representatives and senators, they reverse the position. So when that situation arrives, then one has to think what would happen when media and everything is controlled. Everyone since 1991 is saying, despite what serious economists are saying in opposition, that if you let corporate sectors do whatever they want, that India would be a wonderful country. So that kind of ideology, the new methods of spreading that ideology, they are all very important. And of course they undermine the older ideology.